Hi everyone, it's Dr. Todd Lazon, co-author of The Art of Being Healthy and founder of Lifestyle Integration, and I'm really excited to be bringing to you today this webinar. I've been looking forward to it all day. We're going to be speaking about stress, we're going to be speaking about disease, addressing the cause, and basically reversing the chronic degenerative disease process. And with these webinars, just a little bit of housekeeping before we get into things. One of the things that we've noticed with the technology is that when we switch from one slide to another, or when I use the pointer tool that's available to me, there's often a little bit, depending on your connection speed, a little bit of garbling that will go on. If that's the case, don't worry, it'll resolve itself, and I am recording the webinar. And assuming that that technology works, I'll have it available for people as a link to a YouTube video, should anyone want that after the fact. And the recording never has those glitches on it. It's always a clean recording, if you want to think of it that way. All right, so a couple of other things. Some of you might be aware that just this morning we had a global launch for a new webinar series that we're putting on, and as a result of that I'm going to be trying a couple of new things on this webinar that I'd appreciate a bit of feedback on. And one of those is I'm going to pop my webcam on soon so that you'll be able to see me, and as that comes up on the screen you'll be able to move that around if it's blocking any of the print or any of the PowerPoint slides that you're looking at, so just be aware of that. And the other thing is, I'd really appreciate it if you looked at your dashboard controls that you have on your screen. You'll notice that you've got the ability to click on a few things. One of those things is to raise your hand, and you can ask questions, or you can type in a question. I'd really like someone to ask me a question at the end of all of this, and I'd like to unmute you. So what I'd like to do is be able to say, okay, so-and-so has a question. I won't mention a name. And then I'd like to be able to unmute you so that you've got a microphone connected to your laptop or your computer that you can ask a question that everyone would be able to hear and I'd be able to answer, because that's a feature we're going to be using in the upcoming webinar. So if you can think of any questions, please keep them in mind so that we can go through those at the end of the presentation. All right, so with that being said, let's get straight into things. And one of the things that I want to do when I start any of these webinars is get people in the right frame of mind. And we've got to all be looking at this from a somewhat similar perspective, and I want to go through that to make sure that we're all doing that. And to do so, I'm actually going to get this video cam on before I forget so everyone can see me here. There we go. So I think everyone should be able to see me and I have an idea of what's going on. So getting back to what these belief systems are, I want to set the stage here and get people understanding this. So if you go back in time, one of the things that we knew a few hundred years ago is that the Earth was flat. And we all knew that, didn't we? We knew without any doubt that the Earth was flat. And if you sailed off to the edge of the ocean, that eventually you'd reach the end of the ocean, you'd fall off the edge and you'd reach your demise. So what did people do? Well, they never actually would go sailing that far out because no one wanted to go to certain death. So the point of the story there very quickly is that we behave according to our beliefs. Or another way of phrasing it is our beliefs determine our actions. And what I want to phrase to you very quickly here is, what are your beliefs about health, well-being, sickness, and disease? Because whatever your beliefs are will determine what your actual actions are. And some of the more common beliefs that I've come across over the years are that if you have a chronic degenerative disease, that it's permanent and irreversible. A lot of people believe that. Once you are on a medication, that you will always be on a medication is another belief. Some people believe you can only fix chronic degenerative problems with medication, so that's another belief. So there's all kinds of beliefs out there, and what your belief is very important to determining your overall success. So I just wanted to set the stage with that to make sure that we're all on the same track as we go through this presentation, because it's going to be really interesting, this webinar. I put it together to really get you thinking about why you're unwell or why you have a problem. Because for you to have success, you have to understand the basics. And when I speak to you one-on-one through your report of findings, we can't go through all of the basics. It takes too much time to flesh out, and we also need to go through your specifics. So this is the webinar that will explain the basics that I hope you can really, really understand and stick with. So let's get straight into that first slide. At some point in time, everyone's going to ask the question that you see at the top of the screen there, and you phrase it in any number of different ways. Some people will phrase it saying, how did I get sick? How did my health end up like this? But you'll have some sort of question similar to this that everyone asks, because it doesn't appear out of nowhere. It sometimes seems like it does, but it's a gradual process. And I've got a chart here. This chart represents really everything that you need to know about how our health ends up in a negative state. And let me explain it to you so you can understand where we're coming from. And this is where it might get garbled. So you can see my pointer and highlighter over here on the left of your screen. And that part of the line there represents you in your younger years, or when you were feeling well, when things were going really good. And let's use the example of a headache. And when you're up here, there's no headaches. And what often happens is gradually over time, people decline. And they just get down like this. Their necks get a little bit stiff. They get a little bit tight. And then eventually, one day it seems out of nowhere, they drop below this red line here, which you can see is called the symptom line. And when they drop below the symptom line, they get their symptom, which in our example here is going to be a headache. And what do people do when they get a headache? I can almost hear you answering the question through the actual connection through here, because people are going to say you take a Panadol, you take a Nurofen, you take some sort of pain medication. And the answer to the question is that will work, won't it? It'll absolutely work to make the headache go away, and that person will come up like this, and they'll start to feel better, and they'll usually wrongly assume that they are better. But they didn't deal with the root cause of the problem, so they drop back down again like this at some point in time, and they get another headache. And this time they take another Nurofen, another Panadol, and they'll go up above this line. But again, if they don't deal with the root cause, eventually they're going to drop below the line again and have more symptoms. And this is what we call the revolving door, where they're just going back and forth, up and down, all over the place, not getting any better. They're just usually getting worse because they're not dealing with the root cause of the problem. So if we now shift gears and start trying to understand what are the root causes of these chronic degenerative diseases, the answer is really pretty simple. It's up here. And it is these deconstructive stresses. And I want to be really, really clear right off the bat that when we talk about stress, it is not, absolutely not, just about emotional stress or mental stress. It can be chemical stress, or it can be physical stress, or emotional stress. It can be any of these combinations, and we'll talk more about this in a bit more detail in a bit, but I just want to put that out there for people right off the bat. And here's what happens. If these chronic stresses, these deconstructive stresses, which are represented by this big arrow here, if those outweigh the healing and the innate natural ability of the body to heal, then eventually things decline. It's a simple mathematical equation. If the stresses outweigh the ability of the body to heal, things will decline. And that is the simplest, easiest way to understand what stress is doing to people over time. Now, it's easy for me to say that, and I don't necessarily think that everyone's just going to automatically believe that. I mean, we have to back it up with stuff. So I want to tell a story now that I think you'll remember that'll really drive home how stress is creating these problems for people. And I guess we can start off by saying, and this is pretty clear, when you hear me speaking, you know that I'm not from Australia originally. I was born and raised in Canada, and I moved overseas here when I was 33. And when I made the decision to move to Australia from Canada overseas, at the time I was actually bringing my wife and 3 small daughters over with me. And I was very excited because I'm an outdoors sort of guy from the very beginning. I absolutely love everything outside. So when I was moving to far north Queensland up in Cairns with the wet rainforest, the reef and everything, I was very excited. And I started telling my mom about all the things that were up in this area. And naturally the conversation in Australia turns to things like snakes. And I think there's something like 8 or 9 of the 10 most venomous snakes in this general area. Then we talked about spiders, and then we talked about, of course, sharks. Other things in the ocean that can particularly create damage is things like cone shells, blue-ringed octopus. The list just kept going on and on and on, and it included things like cassowaries, all kinds of different things that can actually create harm for you. But what the real thing was, the real example of stress that I can use is a crocodile. And a crocodile to me is very permanent and very irreversible. You don't have a lot of time. So if a crocodile jumps out at you, we're going to use that as the example of stress. It's a great example of stress. And you need to understand what the physiological stress response is if you want to understand how you're getting unwell. And here's what happens when a crocodile would jump out at you. The first thing that happens is that your fight or flight nervous system is activated. That's your sympathetic nervous system. Okay, and the language doesn't matter, but what happens is this. Your stress hormones are produced. And it is important to understand these. That's adrenaline and cortisol. And what those stress hormones do is they will immediately prepare you for the attack of the crocodile, so they will raise your heart rate. They will also raise your blood pressure. Other things that they're going to do to prepare you for this crocodile attack is it will actually raise your blood sugars. It will decrease your digestion because you don't need your blood and all your energy going to digest lunch that you just had. You actually need that energy to be going to your muscles so that you can activate that fight or flight situation. And in this situation, it'd be pretty silly to be fighting. You generally want to get out of there if crocodiles, jumping out at you. But you've got all of these things going on as well as a few others. You see, your immune system will decline. Because when a crocodile is jumping out at you, your immune system is of secondary importance, not primary. And then another thing that will happen is your intelligence, your rational thinking declines dramatically because you do not want to have a crocodile come out at you and then pause for a second and go, what are my best options here? It's just not the thing. You need to be instinctual, you need to be reactive, and you have to get it all, happening without really too much of a second thought. And that's why, maybe you've never thought of this before, but it's why, if you've ever been in an emotional argument with a loved one or someone like that, that you very well may have said or done something that you almost immediately wish you could take back. I think we've all done that, and it's because we get instinctual and not logical. And I've saved the most interesting one for last as far as the stress response goes, and it's this. When the crocodile jumps out at you, your bad cholesterol will go up. And a lot of you might be thinking, well, why would that go up? I can understand blood pressure and blood sugar, to deal with the crocodile, but why would my cholesterol go up? And the answer is that those stress hormones we talked about previously, the cortisol in particular, the cortisol, which you need to deal with that crocodile attack, is made from cholesterol. So if you're going to need the cortisol, you're also going to need increased cholesterol to be able to make it. So now here's the real kicker. Here's the real thing. What if, and you can picture your lifestyle here now, picture your stresses, picture your chemical stresses, your emotional stresses, and your physical stresses. And they're represented by the crocodile. And let's say you've got all of those things happening all day, every day, day after day, month after month, year after year. Let's say the crocodile never goes away. If the crocodile never goes away, your stress hormones will be chronically, daily elevated. Just low grade, but elevated. And then over decades or years, your body will start to change, and you end up with what we're talking about here, chronic degenerative problems. And that's why stress, represented by these types, is the reason for most chronic degenerative problems. And it's worth me spending this time to explain this to you guys so that everyone's on the same page, because you have to understand that this is the root cause that we're looking to deal with. And everything we talk about from here on out relates back to trying to deal with this stress and contain it and eliminate it. All right, enough about that. Let's move on to the next bit. And these are the rules when it comes to stress. And the first rule is that, and you can read it on the screen, but basically it's saying that your body does the best that it can at any given time. So if we accept that as a fact, and it's a medical physiological fact, if we accept that the body's doing the best that it can, should we not be grateful? And if we don't like what we're getting, then we need to take it as a sign that things are not right and we need to do something about it. So this is the first rule with stress. The second rule with stress, if I get my mouse back out here, is that the stress response is predictable, and it's the same regardless of if the stress is physical, emotional, or chemical. And I alluded to this earlier, and this is key. It does not matter if your stress is from Mercury, it doesn't matter if your stress is from a relationship, and it doesn't matter if your stress is from a sore shoulder. Your body responds with the adrenaline and the cortisol and the stress response. So it does not matter where your stress comes from. And that's important because I come across a lot of people that say, I'm not stressed. Well, yeah, you are when you start looking at their physical issues and their chemical issues if they don't have any of the emotional issues. And the third rule is that the changes associated are intelligent and they allow us to deal with the stresses we're exposed to. Everything is doing what it's supposed to do when it comes to these changes that our body's doing. Our body is changing to help us cope with it. So if we don't like it, we need to change. And that's the take-home point. You guys can read that, but I'll explain it in the way that I like to explain it, and it's this, is that some of you will have been told you have a disease or a pathology. Call it diabetes, high blood pressure, depression, anxiety, adrenal fatigue, whatever it is. It's got a label, it's got a name, we call it something. And I'm exaggerating a little bit here, but it's a load of crap. And it's a load of crap because if we acknowledge what I've just said, it's not the problem. Your body's been intelligently adapting based on the stresses that you've been giving it. So where the actual pathology lies is with your lifestyle, isn't it? It's with the things that you've done or haven't done that have allowed those changes to occur over time. That's what's pathological. So we have to look at ourselves very closely and say, what am I doing in my lifestyle that's pathological, and fix that if we want to have the success. So understanding the change. It's one thing to say that stress is the root cause of everything, and if you deal with that, you can reverse things. But it's another thing to be able to say, well, what if your tissues and your cells have actually changed? So what if things have changed? You know, a cell's gone from normal chemistry, which you can see in the bottom left, and it's shifted to biochemical changes, disease, whatever it is. Well, if it's changed, we've got to figure out why that change has occurred and try to fix that in addition to the stress. And that's why this chart, if you've never seen this picture before and any of the things that I've written about or spoken about, is so important to understand, because this is the nuts and bolts of a nutritional balancing program broken down. So if you've gone from normal to abnormal, there are only 5 reasons. 5 reasons. And my math is not wrong, and I can almost hear again some people talking about this. My math is not wrong. There are 4 things up there. The 5th is actually genetics, but it is such a small percentage. 5% or less of the population can blame genetics, because to blame genetics, that gene had to be active at birth. Things like cystic fibrosis would qualify as a true genetic reason that your chemistry will change. See, all of us have genes for something. We all have genes for something, but that gene has to be turned on. This is the science of epigenetics. And to turn a gene on requires a stimulus or a trigger from the environment. And that's what we're dealing with when it comes to stress. So the 4 factors that are left, excuse me, are deficiencies, excesses, imbalances, and toxins. And I'll explain each of those in turn to make sure that everyone really understands what's going on through there. Deficiency. Deficiency is really easy to understand when we remember that all the cells function better when the nutrients it needs are present. So simple. And it is so simple that most health professionals can't or won't believe that it's the cause of problems in some of the patients that they see. And they're dead wrong. We see deficiency all the time, and not always absolute deficiencies, meaning that you're just deficient in something. You see relative deficiencies where you can have a normal amount of the nutrient, but if you can't use it for whatever reason, you'll still show deficiency symptoms. So here's a case study for you to be looking at. Oh, and by the way, for those of you that have never seen these types of charts before, this is a hair tissue mineral analysis chart. And it's looking at the levels of minerals that you can see on your screen there. So the first one on the left is calcium, for example. And you can see the first 4 are all really quite low. The first 3 are clearly deficient. And this particular case study is a 54-year-old female with brain fog, a bit of depression, fatigue, those sorts of things. And there's no small wonder that this is the situation because she's just deficient. And when we gave her what she needed, those symptoms went away. So deficiency is a very, very powerful and very important reason that cells will go from normal to abnormal and must always be considered. Now we have to deal with an excess. Now if you look at the chart through here, you can see that this is a 14-year-old boy. Anxiety, inability to sleep. I can tell you he also had neurological tics, and he was not doing well in school. He had a few behavioral issues. And on the hair analysis chart through here, I think you'll be able to see really, really clearly that copper, right in the middle of that chart, is very high. Now here's the thing when it comes to an excess. A lot of medical or reductionist thinking type of people would look at an excess and say, aha, that's it, that's the problem. And again, they'd be dead wrong in doing that because yes, it's an issue and yes, it's a problem, but you must still ask that never-ending question, which is why? And when we stopped and asked the question why with this high copper, it comes down to a few reasons. And one of them is exposure in the environment. The second one is exposure to a class of chemicals called the xenoestrogens. They mimic estrogen and then force the body to retain copper. And the third most common reason of why when it comes to copper is placenta transfer from mother to child during pregnancy. Now this is a 14-year-old boy, he's pretty young, and I can tell you when we did the research and we did another test on mom was also copper toxic. So this is a placenta transfer. Now the interesting bit in this case study is this is a retest, and I want you to pay attention to this. Look at this. His level of copper is 5.6. Look at the bottom. His original test was 30.6. Now put that into perspective. Look at the top of the chart. That's 7.5. So if we double 7.5, we get to 15. And if you double that again, you get to how high this boy's copper level was. He was exceptionally copper toxic. And on this retest, I can actually tell you his behavior, his tics, his school performance had all improved dramatically because we got it down to this level of basically 5.6. So that's an example of excesses and how important excesses are when we're looking at things. And I don't think most health professionals really, really consider the role that an excess can have on you. And the next one is imbalances. And in this case study, to illustrate how important imbalances are, we got a 44-year-old male. Stress, frequent illness, fatigue, and I can tell you that the frequent illness was actually boils, bacterial boils, and he was getting these recurrently. He was treating them with antibiotics that were not working, and they kept coming back. Now, when we look at this chart through here, and I'll highlight this just so that everyone can see this. Sorry if that garbles a little bit there. But you can see here, his sodium and his potassium levels are exceptionally high, and especially when you consider them in relationship to calcium and magnesium. And that is an important imbalance because it represents the oxidation or metabolism rate in a person. So this person is fast metabolism, fast oxidation. And we know that in a fast oxidation state, people are more prone to bacterial infections. It's just how the immune system works. When we see low copper, these things generally follow patterns. So this imbalance existed that was allowing his body to harbor these bacterial infections that were creating the boils. Now, we've got to ask the why question. Why is the imbalance in place? And we talk about stress, so a lot of you might be thinking, he must be very stressed if this is all going on. And I can tell you, this particular guy has a wonderful life, wonderful lifestyle, great family life, great job. He enjoys it. He's fit. Everything's going well. But his stress, look at the bottom, lead, mercury, arsenic, and aluminium. This particular individual worked at an airport, was exposed to a lot of chemicals, and it was a toxic stress. And we had to deal with that stress, remove that, get the imbalances under control before we could get the boils under control, which we did. Now, another example with imbalances that a lot of people will ask questions about at some point in time is this funny-looking diagram. And this funny-looking diagram in this particular mineral wheel is showing the antagonistic or opposite effects of nutrients. And in essence, what it's showing is that when one nutrient is forced to rise with an imbalance or an excess like copper, right here, you'll generally see low irons. Because if you look on the chart through here, here's copper, and iron is up over to the right through here, which I can't see because I've got a panel on my screen through here. But you'll see these different connections. You'll also see one that I can show you here is copper and zinc are antagonistic to each other. And if you look on the chart here, here's copper and here's zinc. Now the issue that exists here is you need to be careful with supplementation, because if you give zinc, you will lower copper, and that's a good thing. But if you give too much copper, you're then going to lower zinc, and in this person that'd be a bad thing. So you need to be aware that when you change something, when you give someone a mineral or a vitamin, that there are antagonistic and synergistic relationships, and they need to be considered, and they need to be put into the relationships that are correct for the person. And that's why we use the hair tissue mineral analysis, because it's assessing the tissues on an individual basis, not the blood. The blood is good, but it's only showing the here and the now. And if you think about chronic degenerative disease, it's not in the blood, it's in the tissues. So we don't want to test the blood when the problem's in the tissues. So that's why the hair tissue analysis is so valuable in this particular situation. And if we go on to this next chart, I added this in here because I found this fascinating as I learned this over the years. And this slide's called the 6 scurvies, as you can see. And my point here is that scurvy symptoms can happen for many reasons. And scurvy, for those of you that don't know, is a lack of vitamin C, and the soft tissues start to rot away, basically. Teeth get loose, gums start to bleed is one of the symptoms. People bruise easily, they have trouble healing after injuries, those sorts of things. So the main reason for scurvy, as you can see here, number 1 is a vitamin C deficiency. If you give vitamin C when someone has a vitamin C deficiency, you will fix scurvy. We know this. There's no debate. Now, if you see number 2, copper deficiency, it's interesting that a copper deficiency will show the exact same symptoms. Exact same symptoms as scurvy, which is a vitamin C deficiency. Now, the interesting bit is that copper and vitamin C, if we go back to the example I gave you on the previous screen, copper and vitamin C are antagonists. So I hope everyone's going to follow me here. When one goes up, what happens to the other one? It will tend to go down. So in this situation, if copper is down and vitamin C is up, and you give someone more vitamin C because you think they have scurvy, you're going to make this worse. If someone has a copper excess, however, remember copper excess makes vitamin C go low, so that would be a low vitamin C type of scurvy, and you do want to give vitamin C. And those last 3 that you see, iron, zinc, and niacin excess, all have the effect of making copper go low. If copper's low, you absolutely do not want to give more vitamin C. You need to give them copper. Giving more vitamin C will make the copper deficiency worse. So you can see how, I hope you can see, how involved therapeutic use of supplements are. And I have great respect for medicine. I truly do, and I think it can do some wonderful things. And I agree with it in some areas, and in other areas I don't. And in one area that I do agree with it is that when they say that vitamins and supplements can be dangerous, I actually believe them, because I know that if we acknowledge that vitamins and minerals can do good things, we have to acknowledge the flip side of that coin. You know, we can't have all the good without the bad. And the flip side of the coin is if you use the wrong ones, you're going to create problems. So we need to be assessing this and measuring it, just like any medical professional would use blood tests to check your progress. If they're giving you a blood pressure medication or a cholesterol medication, you have to monitor. Okay, so enough about that, and we can move on to some of the other aspects through here, which is about balance. And I think I've made my point about balance. Everything is related. Everything is related. We can talk about hormones, and I can relate that back to nutrients. We can talk about immune system, and I can relate that back to the hormone system. Everything is related. And toxins, one of my favorite areas, and we don't have time in a webinar tonight to get into great detail about this, but I thought this would be a good case study for people to understand. So this guy, 56, male, anger, aggressiveness, heart disease. You can look at his hair analysis through here and see some of the things that are going on, but let's take a look at his toxic metal profile at the bottom of the screen through here. This is really sad. Again, lead overload, mercury, but here, look at the cadmium. And for those of you that don't know what cadmium is, it is an exceptionally toxic metal that is notoriously affecting zinc, the blood vessels, the kidneys, prostate, and a few other areas. This was creating all kinds of issues with this gentleman. 0.3, the chart stops at 0.1. Toxicity starts to exist right around this level here. He was exceptionally toxic. Aluminium and even some nickel in his system. So toxins are a big deal, and I think a lot of people, they kind of want to put their head in the sand and they don't want to acknowledge that it is a big deal. But in the thousands of these things that I've done over the years and the tens of thousands other people have done, it is an issue. It unfortunately is a very real issue. And we can only measure some. We can't measure all the different chemicals and toxins out there. But this is a good rule of thumb to be able to get an idea of what's going on with people, and it is a big deal. So let me explain a little bit more about what these toxic metals in this situation do. And they basically work in two ways. They block a nutrient or they replace a mineral or a nutrient. And let's talk about the replacing. Let's talk about the replacing first. A while ago, there was a class action lawsuit where a chocolate maker was found guilty of poisoning people with cadmium. And the question that we had to ask, my favorite question, is always why. And they did the research trying to figure out why these people were getting cadmium poisoning, and they did figure it out. And it went right back to the fields that grass was, or the hay was being grown in. And a lot of farmers will know that when we use fertilizers, particularly what's called the NPK fertilizers, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium fertilizers, part of the byprocess of making the fertilizers is the liberation of cadmium. We just talked about cadmium. So what happens is when you put the fertilizer on the field, you're also putting trace amounts of cadmium in the soil as well. And it's not as much of a big deal as you might think, because the plant that's growing, the grass that's growing, it doesn't want the cadmium. It actually wants zinc. But if the zinc's not there, the interesting bit is it will take cadmium in its place. And the reason for that goes back to high school chemistry, which I hated at the time, but absolutely love now, biochemistry. And when you look at the periodic table of the elements, you see that zinc, mercury, and cadmium are all literally stacked one on top of the other, which means, for easy language, they're related, they're similar. So if the plant can't get the zinc, it's not going to die. It's going to fight and kick and scream to make sure it's going to live. So it's going to replace the zinc with cadmium. So now the cadmium's in the plant. Now, the rest of the story is pretty quick. Where's the plant going to go? Into the cow. Now the cow's got the cadmium. The cow doesn't want the cadmium, so it wants to eliminate it out through the milk. Milk makes the chocolate, people eat the chocolate, cadmium poisoning. These things are sneaky. They're very sneaky. And that's why we need clean food, clean water, clean air as best as we possibly can, because the toxins hitch a ride with the nutrients. And the second way that they're really affecting us is they block nutrients. Now you can see on this little fancy chart here this is a brilliant chart. And here's the example of what I'm referring to with cadmium blocking zinc. That's how you read these charts. You look for the toxic metal and you see where it blocks the nutrient. Now when you look at your hair analysis, it becomes interesting. So if someone's showing a lot of mercury, then they are potentially and very likely going to show issues with the ability to use iron, the ability to use zinc, and the ability to use selenium. So when we put together programs for these people, what nutrients will we often, recommend? And it's going to be these nutrients. But then you still need to take into account the relationship that zinc will have with copper, and then copper with vitamin C, and it goes on and on. So toxic metals are really important in that they block nutrients. And I want to show you an example of that. This fancy diagram, don't panic. Let me just orientate you here. This is your thyroid gland, right here. And as you know, most people know, your thyroid gland in general terms is responsible to help you create energy. And a lot of people have trouble with their thyroid glands. Now, here's the way that this works. And we don't need to get bogged down in the language here, but your pituitary creates this hormone, stimulates the thyroid gland, and then you end up producing the hormone T4 and eventually the active hormone T3. But to do it, you need all these nutrients, zinc and B1, you need proper stomach acid function, you need, as most of you know, you need iodine for that thyroid to function properly. And here's where toxic metals come into play. Copper and mercury are notorious for blocking nutrients that the thyroid needs, and they love to go to the thyroid. Okay, it's a big deal with copper in the thyroid, and it's a big deal with mercury in the thyroid. So what you're seeing now on the right-hand side of this chart is where copper blocks the nutrients. So imagine if you were that 14-year-old boy with a copper level of 30. He would have very little ability to create energy with respect to the thyroid in all likelihood, and that's because it's blocking zinc, B6, vitamin C. It's contributing to the back conversion of T3 to T4. You can see wherever there's an X that it's negatively affecting the thyroid gland. Now the only fix is to get rid of the copper. It's not just to give the nutrients, it's to get rid of the interference that's there. And I thought this was a good example because in some of the other speaking that I'll do, I'll use the example where will a doctor believe his patient or his tests? And a lot of the time he'll believe his tests before he believes his patient. So he'll say to the person, usually a woman that's presenting in the office, you don't have thyroid problems, all your blood tests come back normal, everything's fine, don't bother me. The reality is things are not fine because the blood will be normal at the expense of the tissues, and when we do the tissue tests we can see where the issues with the thyroid gland actually lie. So it's kind of like a cell in your body will order thyroid hormone and the body cooperates, it makes the thyroid hormone, circulates through the blood up to the cell that ordered it, and then all of a sudden out of the shadows comes the doorman or the bouncer, if you want to think of it that way, and he stands in front of the door to the cell and he crosses his arms and he looks at the thyroid hormone and he says, we don't like your kind around here, you're not welcome. Can't get in. Body makes it, can't get in. Blood test normal, tissue screaming with symptoms. That's how it works. So what I've done is I've basically explained to you so far stress, how stress is related to chronic degenerative disease and the ultimate root cause for virtually all of it. I've also gone through, and I think in a way that hopefully you all understand now, how deficiency, excess, imbalances, and toxins are what is actually changing cells from normal to abnormal. So if you want to change them from abnormal back to normal, you need to address those things. So what can we do? And that's the programs that we put together. At the root of it here in the middle, you can see stress, which we've talked about at length. You want to fix a problem, get rid of the stress. There are no shortcuts. Now, I've got 3 kids. Are they going to stress? They're teenagers, 2 of them. Are they going to stress me out? Absolutely. Can I get rid of them? No. I don't want to get rid of them, but they do stress me out. So there are some stresses, like perhaps maybe for some of you financial stress, relationship stress, job stress. There are some stresses that you can't get rid of immediately, but you could perhaps over a 3-year plan or a 6-month plan. So we want you to do your best to eliminate. But what you can't eliminate, you must contain. And you can see the containment system that we've put together here. And it's involving diet, lifestyle factors like sleep, water, and exercise. It includes detoxification because toxins are a big deal. It includes correct supplements, and it also includes mental emotional work, which can include things like meditation, prayer, self-development, counseling, any of those sort of mental emotional types of issues. And if you stop and think about it, I believe that this model encompasses virtually all the aspects that a person would need to do to help reverse the effects of stress. We've addressed all forms of stress in one form or another with physical, emotional, or chemical. And then we put together these containment systems to try to help you. And that's what our phone conversations are about, is to make sure that you understand how to do those things. But in the webinar, the point here is to simply point out why you're doing the things and what those things are. But it always comes back to my favorite question, why? You have to understand what you're doing if you're going to have long-term success, because this is a lifestyle-based program that, to be honest, can be very boring, very monotonous, and after a while, very difficult to stick to if you're doing it alone. So you need to know that there's a reason for it that's bigger than perhaps the boredom that might come out of it. What I thought I would do as we start to wrap up a few things through here is show you a case study of detoxification, because I've learned again over the years that you really will only see your test results, maybe in other family members, but you don't have a lot of perspective on what can happen over time or how your tests might look to someone else's, which is why I also included some of these case studies. So this detoxification study is going to serve a couple of points on time and how toxic people can be. So let's just point out a few things through here, because I realize that slide looks a bit messy. It's a 46-year-old male, and a couple of things I'll point out on his first test is over here in toxic metals, he was exceptionally toxic, showing them all, absolutely everything. But I also want to point out that his level of copper was textbook normal, textbook. Now we fast forward in time from March to August, and what do you notice? Look at his copper level. It went from 2.3 to 27.6. That copper was always there, but it was hidden away in his, copper likes to go to the brain, the liver, and the gut. So it was hidden away in those tissues because the body will put it away so it's not going to create issues. But now we're eliminating it, and it was coming out along with manganese, and this was a good thing for his results. For his symptoms, wasn't a good thing. He did not feel all that great while this copper was coming out. However, because we were measuring it, because he could see this, and because we were able to modify his program to a certain extent, he was able to tolerate it. And he did everything we told him to do. And in particular, in this particular guy's case, he was using the infrared sauna twice a day. That speeds the detoxification up immeasurably. So this is his second test, and you can see the toxic metals are all still there, but they're a little bit lower. Go on to the next slide, and on the left is the previous slide that you saw where his copper had gone up to 27.6, but we went from August and now we fast forward again to March, and his copper is still high. It's not 27.6, it's 27.3. It's the same. Still spilling manganese. And he's showing some toxic metals as well. You can see aluminium starting to spill out in an increased amount. His cadmium is actually increasing the amount that it's spilling. But look, mercury right here is now gone. He eliminated the mercury that was basically in his body, which is great. So now we've got to fast forward a little bit more. And we can start to see a few more trends through here. And we can see, this is the one from the previous screen, we can see that now his copper's come down to 19.5, still spilling manganese, but he's starting to spill other things. Chromium's on the rise. But look at the toxic metals, much better. immeasurably better. And if we go on to the next and the last slide, have a look at what's happened through here. Copper's again come down to 15 now. Manganese is still up, but look at iron. Iron's decided to eliminate. He had stored amounts of iron we didn't even know about for 2 years. It's coming out. And down here, nickel decided to have a real go. And over here, aluminium, it came back for a second go. So you can see, I guess the point I'm trying to make is, 1, it takes time. 2, we're more toxic than we think we are. And 3, it's in layers. And it's layered in really deep at times. It's not predictable as to when it's going to come out. And it's not predictable as to how much we have. Sometimes it can be very deceiving, but it is very, very common. And I thought that case study would be something that would be of particular interest to you. So this is really getting into sort of the last to the second, third last type of slide that we're going to put on. And this is the way I'd like to tie it all together before I do a quick review of things. If anyone is going to really hopefully entertain me with a question, I'd really appreciate it. So you've got that dashboard in front of you. If anybody has questions, please raise your hand or let me know or something along those lines through here so that we can test this out, because I'd really like to test it before we do the 4-part webinar series I talked about a little bit earlier. So on this screen through here, this is the best example I can give you of putting it all together. We have a very young female struggling with depression, brain fog, energy, thyroid, fatigue, that sort of thing. And what you can see on here, the first thing that we would do is a history. We do an exam, and in the history we look to identify, does she have physical stress? Does she have chemical stress? And does she have emotional stress? We have to identify those things, because ideally what's the best fix? Eliminate it. You have to come up with the elimination plan. In this situation, we did some of those things. We did the hair tissue analysis, and we came up with some chemical stresses and imbalances. She has a high level of copper. She's a very slow oxidizer or metabolizer. She's got aluminium, and she's got mercury. So now if we put it all together in understanding depression, which is a common problem, and I think people appreciate how this works, take a look at the chart on the right. One of the things that I think a lot of people realize is, to feel good, have that sense of optimism, you need serotonin. Everybody needs serotonin. Where does it come from? Does it magically appear, or do you need to build it? And the answer is you need to build it. So then the next question is, well, where does it come from? And I'll bet you 9 out of 10 of you, or virtually all of you, did not know that it came from proteins. If you don't eat the right proteins that contain tryptophan, you will not be able to properly or adequately be able to make serotonin in adequate amounts. So protein needs to convert to tryptophan, and then 5-hydroxytryptophan, and then serotonin. Now, how do you do it? Well, it turns out that you need nutrients to make those conversions. And what you can see here are the nutrients that you need: magnesium, iron, zinc. Now, let's go back to our chart. Remember, deficiency, excess, imbalances, and toxins. Does this woman have any deficiencies? Well, she needs zinc. Well, look, she's deficient. Problem number 1. Does she have any excesses? She's got an excess in copper. What does copper do? It's a toxin when it's in high amounts. Copper blocks iron and zinc. Oh, look, can't use iron. Everyone follow? I hope everyone follows what I'm showing through here. Deficiencies, excesses, toxins, and imbalances. Copper-zinc imbalance. She will be deficient in zinc relatively, even if she gets enough in her diet, because the copper will be blocking it. She's in trouble. And that's before we take into account that mercury here also blocks zinc. So she's got blockages of zinc, zinc deficiencies, all kinds of issues. Do we wonder why she's having problems with feeling well and optimistic? Absolutely not. So when we worked on this woman, we started giving her the right things, removing the interference, and doing the overall program, she started to get better. And that's how it works. Now, I don't care what your symptom or your disease or your label of what you want to call it, your pathology, going right back to the beginning, the name of it doesn't matter. The reality is it all has chemistry, And if your cells have changed, you need to identify and deal with deficiency, excess, imbalances, and toxins. And that's what we're talking about time and time again. Try to drill this into people's heads because it is that important, and I find most health professionals just don't deal with the basics. They don't understand that the body can heal if you give it what it needs. And very quickly, because I didn't explain this before, a few years ago my youngest daughter came to me with one of those human anatomy learning books, and in the book it was a page in there, and she read it to me and she goes, "Dad, look," it says, "in the time it takes me to read this one sentence, I lose 2,000 to 3,000 skin cells." The relevance of that is that if you lose a cell, you need to replace it with a new cell. So you have brand new skin every certain number of days. You have brand new red blood cells every 120 days. In fact, you have brand new bone every 7 to 10 years because it completely turns over. So who you are from a skeleton perspective in 10 years is going to be 100% different to all the cells that are present in you today. And that's very liberating because it involves change and repair. So I didn't mention that earlier, and I thought I would mention that now. So what can we do? Here's your model. I should probably send this out in a visual form to more people, but this is what you're doing on a daily basis. Identify, eliminate your stress. What you can't eliminate, you must contain. And you contain it with diet, lifestyle, detoxification, correct supplements, and the mental, emotional aspect of things. I hope that's really clear. I hope it's really powerful for people and that everyone can understand what's going on with all of that. And please, if someone would just raise their hand and decide to ask me a question, that would be really, really good, because we're on the last slide. It is in holism where we find the answers. You cannot get better with symptomatic thinking. You cannot really truly get better with reductionistic thinking. It absolutely needs to come from a holistic approach of always asking the why question and what is the natural, holistic, big picture way of thinking. It goes right back to beliefs that we started this off with. What are your beliefs? Because your beliefs determine your actions. So I hope that this has been of really, really good value for you. I really enjoy giving these different webinars. I know everyone gets a lot of good information out of it when I do. If this recording goes off without a hitch, I will look to see if I can get that onto YouTube, and if you're interested in that, you can send me an email perhaps in a week or so asking if I have a copy of this available. And with that, we will wrap up because no one was able to ask me any questions, unfortunately. So we'll leave it there. Until next time, everyone, really, really keep well. Do your best to adhere to the program. Stick to the basics. The basics work over time. It is a marathon, not a sprint. And be kind to yourself. So until next time, keep well, and we'll see you then. Have a good night.